Hi, everyone. Welcome to the September Data and Performance Management meeting. Please enter your agency name into the chat box so we know who is participating. Also, for those of you who may not have attended before, we try to do a little more discussion during this meeting as opposed to the user meeting, which tends to be more updates. So if you can, either please be ready to get on the microphone or call in if you need to, or you can also type in the chat to provide feedback, but please do plan to participate during the meeting because your feedback is very important. Okay, so we have 3 items today. First, we're going to talk about the HMIS minimum participation requirements and review. We will also be talking about coordinated entry participation performance data, and then we will wrap up with the latest homeless prevention project performance reports. So first, to provide a little bit of background on the HMIS minimum participation policy. So when the COC board reviewed and approved a policy for agencies to access HMIS, which we have discussed in previous meetings, they also approved this other part of the policy, which is around users participating in HMIS. And so the intention of the policy is that agencies are entering data into HMIS and contributing data that benefits the COC, and agencies are not just accessing HMIS to view data. So for reference, I included the policy that was approved by the COC board, and so I'll just go over it really quickly. An agency has to have a minimum of 1 active enrollment at all times. Agencies should be completing client intake, case management or services assessments, uploading documents and or client exit data in HMIS. Doesn't necessarily have to be all of those, but some data should be collected in HMIS. The agency has updated at least 1 HMIS record per month, and this can include enrollment data, services, updates, annual assessments, files, or exits. The agency must have a minimum of 1 active HMIS user at all times, and the agency has to be in compliance with any requirements, including data quality, data entry, etc., that have been laid out by either HUD, the coordinated entry lead, or the HMIS lead. And so some of you may be thinking that these thresholds are pretty low. And the reason for that is because there are agencies of all sizes in HMIS with thousands of enrollments, and there are some that have 6, just because of the size of their projects and scope of their work. So we didn't want to create anything that is too difficult for anyone to achieve, but we do want to ensure that HMIS is being updated regularly and that the agency is putting in new data for their clients. So using that policy, I came up with kind of a skeleton list of items that 211 would be reviewing to ensure that an agency is in compliance with these minimum participation requirements. So I'm gonna share these with you, and then I'm also gonna talk a little bit about how we're gonna look at it, and then we'll get into some discussion on this. So if you can kind of compile your thoughts while I'm going through this, and then we'll get into discussion. So my list is the agency. So this list is what would need to occur for an agency to kind of be put on an performance improvement plan, or something that they have to fix in order to continue participating in HMIS. So the agency does not have at least 1 active user. They do not have at least 1 active enrollment. They do not have any activity in the past 30 days, and I included what inactivity is considered here. The agency did not submit the HIC and/or PIT for any appropriate project types, and the agency does not have at least one agency administrator that is an active HMIS user. So those are the basics I had. If you have other ideas, please share them when we get to the discussion section. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and so I'll give everyone a minute to think about that while I go over my other slides. So based on what I shared on the previous screen, the agency should be able to review this data in HMIS as much as possible to ensure that they are in compliance and kind of do a self-review. So we drafted a dashboard, and there's two separate sections, and this is the first one. So this section of the dashboard will tell you, as of the date you're running the report, how many active users you had at your agency, as well as how many active enrollments. And the users is obviously at the agency level, but you'll be able to see what type of users you have, if they are agency administrators or agency staff, and then agency administrators or agency staff that have access to coordinated entry, and then those users with the matchmaker access, which is limited to just a couple agencies. So you'll be able to see that on any given day, how many active users you have. And then you'll also be able to see by project how many active enrollments you have. And the second part of the dashboard is looking at record updates in the past 30 days. So it'll be by project again for most of these except for files. And you'll be able to see for each project how many enrollments or services or assessments were updated in the past 30 days. And so if all of these were 0, then your agency would not be in compliance with the minimum participation requirements. If any of these are not 0, then your agency would be in compliance. So I have a few questions for the group. So everyone get your thinking caps on, and I do have a poll to kind of start the discussion also. The questions are, does the dashboard include what your agency needs to review participation in HMIS? Let me launch this poll. Okay. How often should the minimum participation review be completed by 2110C? Is there anything else that should be considered when reviewing HMIS minimum participation? For those agencies not meeting the minimum participation requirements, what is a reasonable amount of time for them to correct any issues? And then the last question, which is, it's not on the poll, it's more of an open-ended thing to think about. How can agencies be reviewed to determine if they are in compliance with reporting, data quality, and other requirements? So you should be able to see the poll now. And I will give everyone a couple minutes to think about it and provide their answers, and then we'll go over these. And if you answered no to the first question or yes for the third question, if you could either put in the chat what you would like to see that you're not seeing, or we can, if you plan to unmute yourself during the discussion, we can do that too. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds for those that are still filling out responses.
Could you go to the last slide so that we can see those again, those 4 little cat? Thank you, that's helpful.
And while we're waiting, I did get a question. Is this for the agency? Is this by agency or by project? So the requirements will be for the agency as a whole. And it's not by user either. So it's just looking at your agency, how many updates you had in the last month, if you have active users. It's not project specific, but in the past, we've had users say that it's helpful to see data by project, so that's why it's broken down this way.
Okay, Erin, if okay, I unmuted myself. This is Christine De Leon.
Hi.
So looking at the screen you have up right now, this is by project. So this is minimum participation. But again, it's not by user, it's by project. And the previous screen showed the number of users. There we go. Active users, and then enrollments by project. So is there anything that shows users like activity by month? Like, can I see what a user is doing in a month as opposed to that project look, which my users are assigned by projects, so that is helpful to me, but to have that same look by a user might also be helpful if that's not too complex.
So you're specific to these?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So I can see what a user, by user, can I see what projects are they, like if at the top this was like user A, and I could see what enrollments they did by the projects, what assessments. Now you're telling me this is an agency look, but can I do the same look by a person, by a user?
We definitely can do that. We might do that as like a separate dashboard for like user review or something. But yes, we can do that.
That would be great, because that's really helpful for me as an administrator to see my, user upon user, to see their activity levels, knowing what their workload is and how much are they actually inputting in HMIS. That would really help me do a review on them.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And I think I'm sharing the results with you. So let me go back to the question view. Does the dashboard include what your agency needs to review participation in HMIS? Most of you said yes, and someone did say no. If you are comfortable and would like to expand on that, you could either unmute yourself or put that in the chat just so we can make sure we have what you need. I'm not seeing anything, so I'll keep going. How often should the minimum participation review be completed by 2110C? Most said quarterly, and then we had equal responses for every 6 months and annually. Does anybody want to talk about that a little more? I guess why quarterly versus the other two?
I guess, Aaron, for me, what the bigger question is, once you've done a review, then what? So I don't have a lot of users at my group, so it may not be hard to figure out what's going on with them or get them in the program. But the longer the time frame is, so if it's only annually, the more I might have to catch up. And so if I have a user that's out of sight, out of mind, because we're half in office, half out of office, who I'm not paying attention to, say for lack of a better word, I would like to probably, if you guys look at it quarterly, then I can be aware and catch it quicker than if it's longer. Obviously right now, my position, we're working on the NOFO and we're working on FSS and some of these other applications that are out there. So my attention is not specifically on this part of being an agency administrator.
Mhm.
That's why I said quarterly.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts? All right, the next question. Is there anything else that should be considered when reviewing HMIS minimum participation? A few of you said yes. So again, if anyone wants to weigh in on that, that would be helpful. And I can go back to that slide so you can see it again. Nobody?
So I said yes. I'm sorry to be the only talker here, but this is Christine again. I said yes specifically because I was asking about that view. So that
Okay.
dashboard, if it could be broken down by user, that would be helpful to us at OCHA.
Okay. Would other agencies find that helpful also to be able to see kind of a utilization of your users over the previous months? So looking at like this type of information, how many enrollments, assessment services and exits they've entered. I know we've also talked about looking at maybe data quality by user also, which is still on our radar, but let me know if this would be helpful by user also. We got a couple, we got 1, 2, 3 or 4 yeses in the chat, so, okay.
Erin, can I ask a quick question in terms of that? This is Catherine. If you were to break it down by user, would that be for users that are like primary users from your agency? So like that would be FSC staff, but not necessarily everyone who has access to the FSC agency in HMIS?
We would have to, it would probably, for you specifically, it would probably include more than just FSC. We might end up having to do like a filter so you can put in the username and see all the data on them. I would have to look more into that.
Okay, I just was thinking in terms of CES projects specifically. I obviously can't speak on behalf of the County of Orange or Friendship Shelter Mercy House, but just in terms of that, I think, well, really the County of Orange, but I think that it would be helpful in terms of that in case there are any users who have access to the CES project that aren't actually entering or doing anything with that access. I think that would be helpful for us as CES administrators to be able to see and kind of monitor that. But so if you could do that, I do think that would be really helpful for us specifically, or for CES specifically.
Okay. All right. For the next question, I asked, for those agencies that are not meeting the minimum participation requirements, what is a reasonable amount of time for them to correct any issues? So for example, if they don't have any active users, if they don't have active enrollments, how long should we give them to fix that? And half of you said 1 month. a little under half said 3, and then one person said none of these. Does anybody want to expand on that?
I can add some information. I did vote for 3 months. And really I only did that because especially for smaller agencies, thinking in terms of maybe staffing or something like that, that may impact, hopefully not their enrollment, because hopefully, they'd be enrolling people and actually doing data updates in HMIS within the 3 days. But in terms of like an active user or anything along those lines, I just think that 1 month for smaller agencies specifically might be a little bit difficult. And so to have that grace period and that time for them to follow up and ask questions, I think would probably be helpful. So that's the only reason why I voted 3 months, just to give people ample time to really look into that and identify the problem and correct it.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to add? All right. I'm just doing a quick screenshot of these results. Okay. So it sounds like that we're definitely on the right track for the minimum participation review. I just want to give everyone a quick look again at, so these are the items that we're proposing to review as part of the minimum participation requirements for the agencies. So whatever time period we do end up using, if it's quarterly or annually or whatever the case may be, 211 would be reviewing all of these items. And then for any agencies that any of these are not true, we would be following up with them to get their users into HMIS or get their client data into HMIS, helping them with that. So is there anything else that would be beneficial to work on the agencies with, or any of these that seem unreasonable?
That looks good to me.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to keep going. Thanks for your feedback. We're going to take this into consideration. The next steps for this, we will probably have to take this to the Policies, Procedures, and Standards Committee for review. And so when this is finalized and implemented, we will let everybody know, probably at the user meeting, about what the plan is, what the final list is going to be, how often it will be reviewed, and then we'll release the dashboard with that also, so that you can review your agency's activity in HMIS. And then the user specific dashboard will probably end up being a separate dashboard from this, but we have that on our radar also. So I'm going to keep going to coordinated entry. Okay, so a little bit of background on this one. This came up recently during the COC NOFO ad hoc working group meeting. So they feel like it's time to incorporate performance for housing providers in coordinated entry. They feel like it's time to incorporate that data into the performance review that they do as part of the NOFO process. And so this would not be for this current year. This would be for next year. But if we do implement performance data related to coordinated entry We kind of need to start talking about it now so we can figure out what we want to measure, who we want to measure it for, and then start measuring it and give the agencies a chance to review that data and make corrections as needed. So for the purposes of the conversation today, the measures that we are considering are for housing providers that are in coordinated entry. So these are some different measures that I came up with that could be useful. This is not, for the purposes of this conversation, this is not the performance of the coordinated entry system as a whole. It's just related to the housing providers. Another conversation could be about access points also, but that is not the intention today. So I have 3 different measures for housing providers that are participating in coordinated entry. And then I have another little poll for that also. So the first measure that we have here is looking at the number of new enrollments that the housing provider had into their project and comparing that number to the number of referrals to their housing project that were successful. And so this new enrollments column is just the number of households that were enrolled during the reporting period. In this case, it was a quarter. And I excluded any enrollments that entered from rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing projects, because it is allowable to transfer clients from one project to another, but those clients wouldn't necessarily have a referral for the new project. So I excluded those. So this is new enrollments. And then this is looking at how many completed referrals were there to the project during the reporting period. And then the measure would just be dividing the referrals by the total enrollments. And ideally, it would be 100% or close to 100%, especially for COC funded or ESG funded projects. And then if they were not COC or ESG funded, obviously they don't have the same requirement, but that's kind of how the measure is functioning. So I wanted to hear from the group if there's anything additional we need to consider for this measure in the calculation part. When we do the poll, you will be able to provide feedback also on whether or not you like this measure in general, but if anybody has feedback on it, please share now.
So is this, who's talking?
Go ahead, Cassie.
Okay, so is this, so new enrollments, so say like project number 2, does that mean that there were only 5 households that were actually accepted into the program?
There were 5 households that were referred to the program and accepted, yes.
Of the 34.
Yeah, and this is real data.
Okay.
But
wow.
But this project may or may not have a requirement to take referrals from CES. But yes, that's what's happening here.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I was understanding this.
Okay, so Erin, this is Christine Daly on Orange County Housing. So of course, I'm always going to be the problem child. By enrollments, is this an individual or a head of household?
Head of household.
Okay, that's great. Because in our case, we have new enrollments where now that the person has their referral through CES and has been accepted in our program, they want to add their children who have been staying with grandma all this time because they were homeless. And that's 3 more enrollments that can skew our performance in other situations. So we noticed that we're having poor performing projects coming around this next NOFO, and it it's largely because of enrollments from non-homeless situations. And it's those families that are adding members to their household who are housed because they were with grandma. So I want to just make sure if this is going to be a new performance data possibly in the NOFA system, that that would be a difficult thing for us to we can't say no to those.
Right. Yeah, so it's only looking at the head of household enrollment as well as the referral, because the referrals are only associated with the head of household.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or concerns about this? If we were to say tomorrow that you have to start looking at this, would there be outrage?
Nope, I'm very curious to see how our projects look on this.
Not to call you out, Catherine, but do you have any thoughts since you're a little more in the weeds on this?
I think that this is good information to have, especially from a CS perspective. In terms, I mean, obviously, I think from a housing provider's perspective, if it's not going to be used, and this is my understanding based off what you said earlier, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that wouldn't be used for decision making this time around. So is that correct, Erin?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think in that sense, like it's definitely good for them to have that information now so that if they need to make corrections in the future, when it would be considered, based off of how funding will be awarded, that they'll have this information and can take corrections or can make any, corrections and take action as needed. So I think that this is great. I think that this is especially helpful for us as CES administrators to know and be aware of as well. So I'm all for it. I think it's great.
Okay.
And I think Erin, I think as long as people have like that understanding that it's just for information purposes right now and that it wouldn't impact them right now, I think that would hopefully like not cause them to freak out, So I think that it gives them enough heads up, hopefully, to make corrections if they need to.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And I would also invite what suggested corrections you would have. It seems logical that it seems obvious to me, and maybe I'm just completely misunderstanding this graphic here, but would this also conclude, so going back to project 2, as Casey was pointing out, only 5 of the 34 enrollments were actually referred from CES. Does that mean that the other 29 were enrolled and did not have a matching referral through the system? Because right now, I'm not sure, I don't know that 100% we're getting these match lists, we're getting these emailed to us Excel grids, and I can't always find a match in the system. And I'll be told, oh, they're gonna get it, they're gonna do it, yeah. But if I've gone through the process and I'm already ready to enroll this person, I don't have a match, I don't want that to come back and bite me on a report.
Are you enrolling them even though you don't have a match yet?
Well, we do have a match because we are notified of a match via an email. And the first thing we do is we take a look at that spreadsheet that we're given and we go right into the CES system in HMIS and see if we can verify all these. The minute we don't have one in there, we call out to the matchmakers and say, this person is not being shown in HMIS right now. We get a varied response as to why that is. I think a lot of it is, and I don't want to call out any particular agency, but it'll be an agency that doesn't regularly participate in HMS. So it's being relying upon like the county side to put those matches in, manually, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's not an instant thing. Like the match meetings are happening faster than that's happening. So I would maybe ask that we can assure that all matches that are being referred in that matchmaking meeting that are on that grid maybe somebody's going through and making sure that there is an actual active referral in the system. Because if this is going to be a performance issue, I want to make sure that it's, you know, fair.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we can definitely check in on that also, because what I keep hearing is that's temporary, the whole manual match thing that's going on. But yes, I agree. We would not be able to hold those against you if there wasn't a match. So we can take that into consideration also.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or concerns on this measure? All right. The next one. Oh, and just if we were to move forward with any of these measures, we would also, at a later meeting, we'd have to figure out thresholds also. But so you wouldn't be, you'd be allowed to participate in that conversation in the threshold also. So no worries on that either. Referrals denied by providers. So this is looking at, again, by project, for matches that were denied. Were they denied by the client or were they denied by the provider? And what percentage of the matches were denied by the provider? And this one can be a little tricky because the matchmaker is making those matches and they are trying to make those matches based on, you know, eligibility and other criteria that you may have for your projects. So there can be a little bit of human error in that. So I definitely, if we were to move forward with this, I would not recommend like 100% or 0% denied by provider or anything like that. But I thought it might be worth looking at least as if a provider has a high amount of matches that they denied, why is that happening? And you know, is it something the matchmaker isn't understanding about their eligibility? Is the provider incorrectly denying people or whatever the case may be? And so the denials by client, that means that the client said for whatever reason they don't want to be served, so that would not be held against the provider. But I was thinking we might want to start looking at the percentage of denials that the provider initiated and why.
I like this. I feel like this has kind of been an ongoing problem with agencies. Again, not to call anybody out, but so if say like somebody wasn't like not necessarily somebody like that wasn't eligible for the program, but wasn't say finding housing quick enough or something like that, would that be something that would be falling under the category of provider or client?
If the client wasn't finding housing quickly enough, I would say that's provider, because the provider is the one that's setting those requirements on them.
Okay.
So that's a good example, Casey, because in our case, we do put a time limit. Standard, you know, when it's not specified in COC, we fall on the voucher side of things. So standard is 60 days, but we automatically duplicate that because this population is a population with disabilities. So we put them at 180 days. So we give them like 4 months to find housing, adequate housing for them.
Yeah,
they are able to ask for extensions, but
yeah.
If they don't ask for an extension and they don't get back to us in that time frame, we don't deny the well, That's true. If we've issued, never mind, disregard. Because we would have issued a voucher and that means they're not denied by us, so disregard. I'm going down the wrong rabbit hole.
No, I mean, just to piggyback on that, like you guys do have, a lot of times you have a time frame and you have to like apply, there's applications for extensions and things like that. I'm not necessarily, absolutely did not have you all in mind when I was thinking about this. So, I think that if you have a voucher, like you have a time limit on that anyway. I'm just talking about like normal agencies that don't have.
Gotcha. Yeah, it just set me down the wrong rabbit hole because I realized we're talking about match here again and a denial of the match. And if they're qualified, we issue a certificate and that starts them with our project. So then we would exit them from CES. That would be a positive referral. They would have been issued the assistance in essence, but they may not find the assistance. And then that's when our time planes come place. So that doesn't affect, right? Am I thinking that right, Erin, that doesn't impact this particular graphic?
No, this is before they are enrolled in your project.
Okay.
The matchmakers match them to you and then you say yes or no.
Oh, got it. Never mind then. I was kind of thinking the same thing as Christine. Like if they're returned and denied, like if the provider is denying service, like after a certain amount of time.
Well, that should be a negative exit from the project. So it should
Just
be
to
that way.
kind of clarify too, though, what Cassie's saying, or like to add on to what she's saying, I think sometimes it's because just from our experience, there probably is, Erin, but I don't know that in reality, there's always like that housing providers are consistently enrolling families at the same point in time. And so ideally, like if a family has been determined as eligible and interested in the project, then they would get enrolled. But I obviously like don't know the ins and outs of how each housing provider and each project operates, but I think kind of where Cassie's coming from is they may have been determined eligible and interested, but weren't enrolled and didn't find housing within a certain amount of time. And so instead of being enrolled and exited and referred back to the queue, they were just denied altogether because they were never enrolled. So I think, Cassie, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that's kind of like where your train of thought is coming from.
I mean, possibly both.
Okay.
Being enrolled at the the correct time and then being returned to the queue because the client is not performing, versus, and as well as, the example that you just gave. I'm just thinking that, there were a lot of instances where, again, going back to Mercy House, we had a lot of instances where we had taken on clients and had them in projects for a really, really long time. And we got like kind of, knocked down in our, we were not meeting thresholds for certain projects because of that. And then, I, through kind of the frustrations of that, heard rumor that there were other agencies that were doing the complete opposite and were returning or denying families and individuals because of they might be difficult to work with or basically just taking on easy cases. So it could have been both examples, and I don't know if anybody else has any specifics.
Well, just one other thing here, Erin, that I've noticed is that one thing that might get tricky that I'm just kind of thinking ahead of time is I think this is really useful information to look at whether it's denied by client or denied by provider, but I can see instances where those may overlap. And so if I'm looking like at project 5, of course, we don't know what project that is, but I'm just seeing like the denied reasons under both, denied by client or denied by provider, they're kind of like the same. And so if a client doesn't show up or call, that could also be left up to interpretation of like, okay, well, the client's not engaging, they're denying the opportunity because the provider is interested, or that could easily be selected by the provider too. So I think since there's no like differentiation necessarily between those sub reason or like those denial reasons, that it could just be that the provider is saying, yeah, I'm going to deny them because they're not engaging. And another provider would say they're not engaging, so they're the ones, you know, declining this opportunity. And that may just play into how this data is being presented, but that's the only thing I wanted to add here.
Yeah, I have thought about that also. So for the measure, we would look specifically at the denial type, whether it says client or provider. But if we were to implement this, we would include the denial reason, you know, on the spreadsheet also for your review, so you can see what that looks like. And we could review it also and like provide guidance on if they said the client doesn't show up for call, you know, should that be denied by client or denied by provider, and try to standardize it. You know, it would definitely be a work in process, but yes, I thought about that also. Would it make more sense, instead of comparing just the type of denials, would it make more sense to compare completed versus denials? So like they had 20 referrals and they denied 10 of them. Would that be a better measure?
I think both measures are important, but I think giving the context, the additional context of how many were completed is going to be helpful, because if two agencies have denied 10 households, but one agency only put in 12 opportunities and the other one put in 50, then obviously there's a difference like in that performance, so to speak. So I do think that would be just good context, or maybe like percentage of referrals that were denied. Is that kind of what this referrals denied by provider is on here?
This is taking the denied by provider divided by total denials.
Okay, that makes sense. So I do think like either a percentage of like total referrals that resulted in a denial would be good, or, you know, to frame that next to the total number of referrals that they received, period. But I do, Erin, I do think that context is important in terms of like participation and performance.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on this one? All right. The last one that I had was looking at the amount of time that a client is matched to a housing opportunity. So it's the average number of days between the date they're matched and the date that the agency enrolls them in the project. So like we've already kind of talked about, the client should be enrolled once they're determined eligible and they've said, yes, I want to be served through this program. And so how long is it taking for that decision to be made? Any thoughts on that one?
I think this is great. I don't think these numbers are great, but but I think this is, I mean, this is something that's kind of been, hasn't this been on the COC dashboard kind of anyway, like as a like an aggregate number?
It is on a dashboard, yes.
On one of the many.
Yeah, but I don't think, we haven't looked at it by project anywhere.
Got it.
So, question on this. So to me, the enrollment side of this is a project start. Is that correct? Is that the date you're
Yes.
looking at?
Yes, so this is not necessarily the date you place them in a unit.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to go by project start on this. What about the other side? Where are you getting the match date from?
The match date is the date the matchmaker matches them to your project. They're
In
assigned,
HMIS
yes,
or at the
Yes.
meeting or?
it's in HMIS.
Okay.
And then I did not include anything on with the housing move-in date because at that point they are enrolled in your project and we're kind of already
Right.
capturing that under the days to permanent housing placement.
Yep. I agree. So on this, since we're diving into this information so detailed, is there a report that I can run that shows me clients matched to my projects? Because when I go into that referral screen, it's going back to like a long time ago to clean that up. You and I have had this conversation. I don't mean to bring it out here because I know that's separate and I don't want to talk about specific only, but just a report I can just pull. So maybe it tells me, you know, the client's name or their ID, the date they were matched and what project they were matched to.
Yes, I think it's called pending matches. I would have to find out the specific name, but it's
Okay.
under, if you go into either the County of Orange or the Family Solutions Collaborative for individuals or families, it's
Okay.
under there in the data analysis tab.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I just dropped it in the chat for you, Christine.
There you go, Catherine.
Way to go, Catherine. Thank you. My hero.
Any other thoughts on this measure? All right, so I have.
Karen, sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
I'm not asking this because I have an answer in my mind that I think is right or wrong, but do you think it would also be interesting to see like the average number of days between a match and denial and see if those like are maybe close to match and enrollment? Because I would just be interested to see like, you know, kind of how soon after our denials happening. I don't know if that would lend us any like really insightful information, but I just kind of had that thought and thought maybe it would be interesting to us. I don't know.
It could be interesting to compare the two. Although I don't know if we should gauge performance based on that because, you know, if they've got like a list of eligibility requirements and the first one, they're not eligible, you know. But yeah, I think it could be something to at least look at and see.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
All right. So I've got another little poll for everyone. Let me see if I can do this. All right. So this one is regarding coordinated entry participation performance data. The questions are, which measures should be used to review performance for housing providers participating in CES? And you can select one or more than one if you'd like. Should these measures be implemented for all permanent housing projects or just those that are COC or ESG funded? And the reason I ask that is because COC and ESG is required to participate in coordinated entry while other projects are not. Are there other performance metrics for housing providers in coordinated entry that should be considered? And then the last one, should performance metrics be developed for access points? So this would be probably a future meeting if that's something that the group is interested in. We would focus on performance for those agencies that are serving as access points into the coordinated entry system. So probably something related to how many VI stats are entered or documents or something like that. So I'll give everyone a couple minutes on these questions. And while we're waiting, if you do have some more context to provide on your responses, you are welcome to share those in the chat, or you can unmute yourself also. All right, I'm going to give it a few more seconds, just waiting for a few more responses to come in. All right, please hit submit if you haven't already, and I'm going to close the poll. All right, so the first question, which measures should be used to review performance of housing providers participating in CES? And we got a pretty even distribution across all three of the measures that we discussed. And should these measures be implemented for all permanent housing projects or just those that are COC or ESG funded? We got the majority of the responses were for all permanent housing projects. I want to pause for a minute and give anyone an opportunity to argue on either side of this before we keep going. Or we just let the poll speak for itself.
I can go. I chose the all PH projects, and the only reason why is even though that may not be taken into consideration in terms of, you know, funding that the COC may be deciding, I think that it would be beneficial in the sense that if maybe an agency has a permanent housing project and they're not receiving COC funding, then and they wanted to apply for it in the future, then they would have, like, you know, what their current performance is, and that would be especially useful to them. I think also just in terms of, you know, if they are utilizing coordinated entry and getting referrals, then it would just be good, you know, for everyone, like CES administrators, the housing providers, to be able to use that as a way to have a conversation about maybe how their utilization or participation in CES is going. So I think that it would, even if it wouldn't result in any action one way or another, it could definitely open some doors to some really good conversations, and in turn open the doors for more, you know, options for households accessing housing services through CES.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. The next question, are there other performance metrics for housing providers in CES that should be considered? So if anyone that said yes would like to expand on that so we can consider those other measures also, that would be helpful. All right, I'm not seeing anything. Should performance metrics be developed for access points in CES? The majority said yes. So again, inviting anyone to argue on either side of this one. While I screenshot these.
I'd like to see it on our end, just to see like how we're performing. That actually might be something that would be kind of beneficial on the staff level, the user level. Just to, I mean, maybe not for any like, you know, necessarily good reason, but just for like our, you know, we do a lot of, how do I explain it? For like merit reviews and stuff like that, we do a lot of, you know, cross discussion on like how our staff are performing and like who are our you know, key players and who is struggling. And I think that would be something that would be a good training tool for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on what types of things you would like to be able to see for access points?
I mean, really, I would just like to see who is actually completing, you know, actually entering people into CES. I think that would be, oh, thank you, Catherine. I just to see like who is actually participating and who is leaving it to their coworkers to do.
Okay.
So I don't think anything like super fancy, but maybe even just like a count would be fine.
Okay. Did someone else unmute?
Oh, Caitlin did. I was just gonna add to Cassie on that, were you suggesting that like VI SPDAT was one of the things that could be measured from access points in CES, like how many are being completed and stuff like that? I feel like that could be useful data.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, what Aubrey said. Hi, Aubrey. What Aubrey said, time between enrollment, assessment, and referral. But also, is there a way to yeah, see like when documents, like, is there a timestamp on when documents are uploaded and things like that?
Yes, so that is what that files chart is looking at here, or this number. So this is looking at how many files were uploaded in the previous month for the agency. So yes, we can see that.
Okay. So that would be useful as well, to see how long it takes us to get them doc ready and things like that.
Yeah, I second that.
So to piggyback on this document ready, because I had a conversation amongst our staff about that term and what that really means. And we actually shot a question out to HCA side, the county side of this. And just for the group that's here. So is document ready, just for my clarity's sake, does it still mean that a client that's being referred over to a housing opportunity will have at least 2 documents? One, verification of that person is chronically homeless. So they'll have a homeless verification, and they'll have a verification of a disability. That's part A. Is that document ready?
Aubrey or Catherine, do you want to answer that?
I can start, and Aubrey, if there's anything you want to add, feel free to. So Christine, it depends on the project type. The minimum documentation that's required for any match through CES is a third-party homeless verification. And then if we're looking at PSH, then yes, we do look for the additional documentation such as the disabling condition form or any homeless verification that would be used to establish the chronic homelessness, the length piece of that. So yes, and then in terms of vouchers, which you're seeing on OCHA's side, if that's like a, you know, for the vouchers, it's not a requirement that they be chronically homeless, but that's how we prioritize them. And so there may be some households that get referred to you, especially I should say on the family side. I don't know so much about the individual side, but on the family side, we definitely do make referrals to vouchers for families who are not meeting that chronic homeless status, simply because we have gone through the priority and we didn't have 5 that month.
Right.
But so bare minimum, they should have at least 1 if they are chronically homeless, and they were prioritized as chronically homeless, then they should have that documentation as well.
So for transparency, we would not normally have a difficulty discerning or getting evidence of a person who's disabled because we have other means in which to do it. We have systems. We can access SSDI and systems of that nature. So we can usually verify a disability. Our issue is the length of homelessness or the accuracy of the homelessness side of it. As the documentation, so HUD requires us to have documents dated within a certain amount of time, right? So if you're a person who's outreaching a client, they're saying they're homeless, they've been homeless for 6 years, and you're verifying that, whoever is signing that document saying, I have verified that this person has been homeless continuously or on this many separate occasions for a total of 12 months, that date. And then when they're uploading into the system, we're seeing some that are outside of what we would like to see, because when we get our performance reviews, HUD's looking at a 60 days, usually they want data very fresh within 60 days. So how is that being handled? I don't see anywhere, and I looked, that there's a requirement for a certain time frame for that document to be signed, but is there a general practice that we're using? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I can give you my answer. I also think it would be really good, specifically with what you mentioned about within a certain time period and the CES policies and procedures. That is probably best answered by the Office of Care Coordination, because individual CES and family CES, we just follow the policies and procedures and the expectations set by the COC. But in terms of like, if we're looking at it based off of a certain date, or if it's recent within a certain time period, we're really just looking to see if, based off the information available in HMIS, if that lends to us being able to say that they are chronically homeless. And so I think the reason for that, Christine, just in transparency, is because there may be a PSH project that also is looking at chronic homelessness that would not require it to be dated within a certain time period. So that would end up becoming like a compliance thing on the housing provider's end to make sure that documentation is within a certain time period. So I would say, like, on our end, we wouldn't want that to be a barrier for any household to be matched, because potentially if that documentation is available in the system, then ideally, like, that contact information would be there for you to get something more updated if you needed it or anything like that. But that's kind of that's the best I can answer that question for you.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much.
All right. And then for those who maybe don't have access to the chat, the items that Aubrey mentioned for looking at access point performance is time between enrollment, assessment, and referral, and how long it takes for correct documents to be uploaded. So we can put those on our list for a future meeting on access point performance. Any other thoughts or comments on the coordinated entry participation data? All right. So I'm going to move on to our last item, which is the Homeless Prevention Project Performance Reports. So let me pull those bad boys up. All right. So the Homeless Prevention Project Performance Reports were pulled for July 1st, 2020 through 6/30, 2021. And again, you can as normal, you can see how each project is performing for all of the measures listed. We have a bunch of prevention projects now. And the goals that we're looking at for homeless prevention projects are decreasing the length of time in prevention projects, helping adults maintain or increase their income while enrolled in the project, helping adults maintain or increase their income as a project exit, exits to successful housing situations, and ensuring clients do not enter the homeless system after being housed. So if you haven't already, please check this report out for your prevention projects. And then we have the goals and outcomes report, which is looking at how homeless prevention is functioning overall in our COC. So this first page is a breakdown of how prevention projects are performing for each measure and comparing it to the last reporting period. And we last looked at this in March 2021. So you can see for goal 3, we have had a big drop in the length of time that clients are staying in homeless prevention projects, which is great. And is I'm thinking that the reason for the decrease is due to things maybe settling down a little bit more, and in terms of you know, COVID and everything, and the way that projects are functioning is kind of returning more to normal, because in the last September 2020, the length of time was closer to the 73, and there was a big jump to the in March. So and that's why I'm thinking there was a big drop again. For goal 6 and 7, which is looking at income during the enrollment or at exit, we have improved in both a little bit, which is great. And then for goal 8, we've also improved for exits to successful housing situations. And for goal 10, it's looking at the percentage of clients that enter the homeless system after being housed, and we're maintaining our performance right below that threshold, which is great. So I did want to suggest for goals 6 and 7, increasing the threshold a little bit. These measures are easier for homeless prevention projects to meet because it's not only looking at increased income, it is looking at maintaining client income. So that is why their performance is so much higher. So I would suggest increasing our threshold for both 5%. So for goal 6, the threshold would increase to 45%. And for exits, it would increase to 40%. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Nope, feels good. All right. And then also, you'll notice that the exits to successful housing situations is fairly high for prevention. This is because clients in prevention projects are already in a housing unit. So the purpose of the project is to keep them there. So it's a lot easier to achieve since you don't have to work on finding them a housing placement. You're just like paying their rent or whatever the case may be. So that's why this is higher than other project types traditionally. All right, so diving into each measure a little bit, you can see the project type score is 73 days. So we're looking at how long clients are staying in prevention projects. The average is 73 days, and you can see the different subpopulations and how they're performing on this measure. Households without children tends to be shorter. Households with only children is the shortest. That's also likely a data quality issue. These are probably children that are supposed to be associated with adults in households with children. So lowest length of time is households without children, and the longest is veterans. And we have the breakdown for the number of enrollments that fall into each of these categories. So you can see a large majority of enrollments are enrolled in the prevention projects for 60 days or less. And then we've got a fair amount that are staying in the project from over 2 months up to 6 months. And then just a few that are staying for up to a year or even over a year. Goal 6 is looking at adults that either maintained or increased their income and were still in the project as of the end of the reporting period. And also they had to be in the project for over a year. So that's why the number of clients included in this measure is so small. It's because prevention projects usually do not last more than a year, which you can also see up here from measure goal 3. And so it's only looking at those that were there for more than a year and are adults. And you can see 85% of them maintained their income during their enrollment, and another 9% increased their income, which is great. And you can see if you look at the different subpopulations, veterans had a little bit lower performance, but they also had a really small amount of clients that were included, so that could be skewing their results. And chronically homeless with 1 client was at 100%. The next measure is looking at adults that increased or maintained their income as of project exit. So this is only those adults that exited during the reporting period, and the performance across different subpopulations is pretty close, and pretty close to an alignment with the project type overall. 86% of these clients maintained their income, and another 8% increased it. So you can see that breakdown there. Only 3% of clients had no income, and then maybe 1% had unknown there, which is great because we do want that information collected at exit. Goal 8 is looking at successful exits to permanent housing situations. We're pretty strong across all subpopulations for this measure. Households with only children is lower, and again, I think these are likely clients that should be associated with adults. So I think that's a lot of what's happening there. And then you can see for those that did not exit to permanent housing situations, these are the situations they did exit to, and the majority of them, that information was missing. So I did want to ask any of those prevention providers that are here, under what circumstance the exit information would be missing. Is it something like the client got an eviction, or not an eviction notice, but they were notified that they were no longer going to be served in the program and then they disappeared, or kind of how that circumstance is coming up for those prevention clients? I'm looking through and seeing if there's a prevention person on here.
Erin, could you repeat your question? Sorry, I just ran to the restroom and came back.
No, Catherine. I'm wondering for prevention projects, what the circumstances for having missing exit information. Is it that maybe the program or the family was notified that they were no longer going to be served by the program and so they disappeared, or if there's some other circumstance?
I don't know that this is particularly helpful to you, but I'm just thinking if it's like no exit enter completed in some of our prevention projects, that may happen because we have the ability to pay for more than 1 month of rent. And so we keep them open in the event that like hopefully we would be able to connect with the family, see if they're still in need of assistance for like a second or third month. And then we don't know where they go. And so there's the potential that that's being entered as a no exit interview completed versus a rental by client. But if I'm like speaking to like why it would be missing, that's really like the only thing I could think of is that the household would fall out of contact, and because you truly don't know that's what is being selected.
Okay.
Even though it kind of makes sense that it should be rental, if you paid that month of rent, then it wouldn't make sense for them to be evicted at that point. But that's what I have to offer you, Erin. I don't know how helpful that is.
Okay, and I got something in the chat when the client self-exits. As a, I guess, workaround for this, could you just exit them as soon as the rental assistance is provided?
I think sometimes, you know, like Catherine was saying, they are left open, and just, you know, finishing out the month to see how they're doing. But I don't know exactly what self-exit means when like we're literally paying for them to stay in their home. I mean, I know every now and again, the scenario that you brought up, Erin, where it's like, hey, you know, this is the last month that we can pay rent, and then they just kind of like ghost you. Like that's definitely happened, but not 95 households. Like that seems like really high.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of why I'm wondering, maybe is it more of a process thing that some users are like waiting for a goodbye from the client or something, or maybe they should just be exiting straight after the rental assistance is provided?
I think if it's like a one-time rental assistance, then probably, then like definitely, unless there's like some extra requirement for the grant funder that there be case management or whatever that is ongoing that would, you know, make someone keep that household enrolled even though they're not receiving the financial assistance. But I think too, the only other thing I can really think of, just because COVID changed so much for us in being able to be more flexible with offering assistance more than one time, we didn't just exit someone immediately after the assistance was given, because then if they did need another month, it would still technically be that entire enrollment instead of having to like enter, like enroll and exit for every month of assistance that we were able to offer them. But yes, I think maybe some like guidance on if it would be appropriate for, you know, agencies to exit a household as a rental by client if they did pay that month of rent and they are exiting the household within that same month, then that would make sense. But I really, yeah, that's I really don't know, Erin. I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay. Okay, we can do a little digging too and look at, I'm pretty sure the data standard says that prevention projects or enrollments should be exited when they stop providing assistance. But we can do a little more digging and maybe provide some more guidance on this at like a user meeting or something.
Yeah, I think just really quickly, I think some, you know, like some ESG is like, you know, 1 to 3 months, and then some of them are super lenient. I think it really depends on the contract. You know, it's, I just, like I said, I've known a lot of clients to stay in prevention projects for a really, really long time. Just because we could, and they just really like, just thinking of specific clients that were elderly or, that just couldn't work and literally were just on a fixed income and were, living at the cheapest place that we could possibly find, but like still didn't have the income. So we would float them for quite some time. But it was like very, very like month to month, like, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then I can see where somebody might just dip out, or stop responding after a while. Or like Catherine was saying, if there is requirements for us to do case management and they're like, thanks bro, I got my money, like I'm gonna stop talking to you, like that's another scenario.
Okay. All right, we'll look at that a little bit more too, if that makes sense. All right, last measure is looking at clients that exited permanent housing or exited to permanent housing from a prevention project, and then they later returned to a project in HMIS. And almost all of the clients that are returning to another prevention project. So that I think is not necessarily a bad thing. It means that the first agency provided enough assistance for the client to stay where they were, and then at some point they maybe needed help again, and so they had to return to a prevention project, but the client didn't actually become homeless again, which I think is considered a win. And then the other types of returns are fairly small, the largest being to rapid rehousing. And we also have where the clients exited to initially before returning, and most exited to either somewhere they owned or rented with no subsidy, which makes sense, followed by those with subsidy, and then those with family friends. So maybe they weren't able to keep their unit, but they were able to be placed with family or friends permanently. So, and another measure that we may add to the future for this, or not another measure, but another chart that we may add to this measure in the future for all project types, is looking at how long it's taking before they're returning. So is it 6 months, a year, 2 years? So we may be adding that in the future to this also. Any questions or comments on the homeless prevention PPR? All right, so we are right at the end of our time. So I will hang out for a minute in case anybody thinks of any questions or comments. If you haven't already, please enter your agency name into the chat box so we know who's participating. Our next meeting will be on October 14th. Same time, we will send out the reminder when we publish the next project performance report and also at the user meeting. And following this meeting, we will send out the meeting minutes and the recording and also the slides. So thank you guys so much for attending. I'll hang out for another minute.
Thank you, everyone. Great comments.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks everybody for your feedback. It's really helpful. Thanks. Bye, Catherine.
Bye. Have a good day.
You too. All right. I'm gonna stop the meeting now. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.